Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This is another one of my viewer request reviews, and this time I'm going to be talking about the first episode of the show Once Upon a Time. This was a request from a viewer who goes by the name of Danger Mouse. I have to say that I heartily approve of that choice of online handle. Danger Mouse was a really great cartoon show, if you're not familiar with it, from the UK that aired on Nickelodeon back in the 1980s. I watched it many, many times as a kid and really enjoyed it. I think that was that was definitely the first British TV show that I ever watched. And during my teenage years, I ended up actually developing quite a fondness for British TV. So I guess I can say Danger Mouse was probably the start of all of that. Well, anyway, let's jump right back into this. Let's start talking about the show. And please forgive me if I don't synopsize. Boy, that is a surprisingly hard word to say. The entire episode. But the short version of it is that we start off in Fairy Tale Land, which is what I'm just going to call it for the sake of simplicity. Snow White and Prince Charming quickly, get married. We get to see the seven dwarfs and all that other fun stuff. And at the wedding, the evil queen, who for some reason is still alive, shows up and says, "Okay, enjoy your happy day. Sooner or later, I guess I should say, I will unleash horrible magic upon the land and plunge you all into eternity of misery, and I will be the only one left with a happy ending." And of course, everybody just kind of stands there. And the queen just sort of turns on her heel and starts leaving. It's at this point that the Prince Charming, actually decides, gee, maybe I should try and do something about that, and throws his sword at her. Well, the prince is apparently a pretty strong guy, or he trained at the House of Flying Daggers, because the sword goes like an arrow, which is totally, completely and utterly realistic. And of course, the queen just sort of puffs in a big puff of smoke. So anyway, the short version of what happens after that is, yeah, the evil queen's curse is coming to consume the land in a way that seems disturbingly reminiscent of the Smooze from the 1980s My Little Pony movie, but not without some Black Knight guys to hang around with her. And before I continue on, I have to stop and say something. What exactly is the motive of all these Black Knight goons that she has helping her out? I mean, she publicly proclaimed in front of more or less the entire Fairy Tale Land population, "I am going to destroy the world and plunge everyone but me into a realm of eternal misery." So, what exactly is these guys' motive for helping her out? Now, granted, maybe she just said, "Oh yeah, well, I went everybody but me and the people who work for me," or I guess they could be like some thing that she summoned up with magic, like ring wraiths or something. But you know what? Ultimately, that's really not relevant to the plot, I admit. But it's just something that went through my head while I was watching this. But anyway, during the time that this has happened, the Prince Charming, Snow White, they've not been idle. They've, with the help of Jiminy Cricket, the Blue Fairy, and the Seven Dwarves, and Geppetto, and a bunch of other fairy tale folks, have come up with one hope. They've built a cabinet which can send one person to another world. And in all of this time, they went and were able to secure a prophecy from, of all people, Rumpelstiltskin, who says, "Oh yeah, the queen's kid will, when she becomes 28 years old, will come back to Fairy Tale Land and restore everything and make everything all good and happy again." So anyway, it ultimately ends up with the baby being sent to, surprise, surprise, the real world at the last minute. So the baby eventually grows up to be a woman named Emma Swan, who is a bail bondsman / quasi bounty hunter. And of course, she's also extremely attractive. So we have the extremely attractive bail bondsman / bounty hunter lady, who, of course, really could only exist in a work of fiction. But Emma, I guess, does kind of get a bit of a pass on this one, seeing as how she's actually from the land of fiction. Well, actually, I should say she's from Fairy Tale Land. The land of fiction is from Doctor Who. Yeah, first Doctor, man, he's cool. But anyway, let's get back to that. So Emma's got an okay. Actually, Emma's life kind of sucks. She's lonely. She doesn't really have anybody in her life. And then up on her doorstep, on her surprise, surprise, 28th birthday, turns up the kid she gave up for adoption as a teenager. And he, through the power of being a cute kid, manages to sway her. Well, okay, you know what? Let's just kind of cut to the chase here. The kid, whose name is Henry, basically says, "Oh yeah, I live in a little town in Maine where all the people from fairy tales have been turned into real people and forgotten who they are." And and you know, that's basically the main gist of what we get. We do get to see the town. We get to be introduced to some of the people who are there and realize that through the flashbacks we see to Fairy Tale World that, as strange as he might seem, Henry is actually telling the truth. And honestly, not a whole lot of stuff is resolved. This is, of course, the first episode of the series, so it's mainly about setup. It is there to give us a sense of Henry and Emma as characters, as well as Henry's adoptive mother, who I believe is named Rita or Regina. Yeah, Regina, who, of course, is the real world counterpart to the evil queen. And just really to set up the world in which this story takes place. And it does that. It does that quite well. For something that's only about 44 minutes, I have to say, this show is actually pretty well written. I found myself liking Emma quite a bit. The kid that's playing Henry has, charm by the bucket. I really did like this kid, and you'll forgive me if I honestly just didn't bother to write anybody's name down. There are some folks in the cast who look familiar. I'm sure I've seen the fellow that played the dwarf Grumpy and some stuff, but nobody who I could really say is a name, a big name. But anyway, it sets up the world nicely. Emma and Henry are characters that I found myself liking, found myself getting attached to, and I genuinely found them people that I would want to see more of. But let me take a second to gather my thoughts here. While I was watching this, there was one thing that kept floating through my mind in the background. And if you don't follow the news about TV shows being production and what is in the works and all this, you might not have heard, but a while back, ABC, which is the network that made this show, bought the rights to a comic book series called Fables. And I've read not all of it, but I've read the majority of the Fables comic books, and they're very, very good comic books. But the short version of the story of Fables goes like this. Often, Fairy Tale Land, and I'm not being 100% accurate with the terminology from the comics. I'm just trying to give you the short version. A horrible, evil army arises and goes rampaging through the various worlds of the fairy tale characters, and they're all driven off into the real world, where they set up a little redoubt, their own little tiny community, in an apartment building in New York City. And the story is, a lot of it is how people from the fairy tale world interact with the modern world, as well as the way they deal with the conflicts between each other, because both good and evil fairy tale characters escaped into the real world. And of course, there's, we can't let ordinary people find out about us. And of course, then there's all these evil people back in Fairy Tale Land who've taken over their homes, and the fairy tale characters, well, they don't particularly care for that and would like to have their homes back. So anyway, Fables is a very, very good show. And and while watching this, I can't help but wonder, okay, just how much inspiration from Fables did the people that make this show take? And at least according to the Wikipedia article, the people who made the show have said, well, okay, we've read some Fables, but this is its own thing, and I think the actual quote they used was, "It's just on the same playground." And you know what, folks? I'll give them that. It does bear some similarities to Fables. As I understand it, there's actually another show on TV right now. I haven't seen any of it. I haven't seen a single episode. I really don't know much of anything about it. It's called Grimm, I believe, and it's also got some real world fairy tale mythology mixing going on. So, okay, so let me be 100% clear. I'm not accusing the people who made the show of ripping off Fables. I can see that they may have taken a little bit of inspiration from it, but it's in the same playground, I think, would be a fair description of what we're looking at here. This is pretty much its own animal, and while, again, it does bear some similarities, it also still manages to deliver what I consider to be a reasonably good show. As I've said, I think that Henry and Emma are good characters. I'm honestly interested in seeing what happens next. Let me see here. Um, yeah, let's just take a step away from that and talk about a couple of the problems that I had with the show. The first one is the character of Rumpelstiltskin. Look, Rumpelstiltskin is basically portrayed as, in fairy tale land, he's portrayed as just looking like, honestly, a scary, dirty, possibly pedophile homeless man. And in the real world, he's just a slightly creepy looking guy in a suit. So, I understand that this show was done on a TV budget, and honestly, apparently not a terribly high TV budget. I mean, for God's sakes, Battlestar Galactica was done on a TV budget on the Sci-Fi Channel of all places, and it still looked a heck of a lot better than this. But, I mean, come on, surely you can do better than creepy homeless guy for someone like Rumpelstiltskin. And also, there's the part where Henry is missing, and neither his mother or the sheriff think, let's check his computer. They need Emma to tell them that they should do this. Now, the sheriff tries to hand wave it by saying, oh, I'm very old, I'm just kind of old-fashioned, I prefer pounding the pavement, yada, yada, yada. Also, nobody seems to remark upon the fact that a small town in Maine has an English guy for a sheriff. I'm not trying to slam anybody who chooses to immigrate to the United States or anything like that, but still, if you're in a small town somewhere in America and one of the local cops is apparently English, aren't you just? I can't help but think somebody would at least say something. I mean, would be extraordinarily unusual. But no, it's not remarked upon in the slightest. But anyway, okay, so let me start wrapping this up. Overall, I think this is a good episode. It does a good job of introducing us to our main characters, of setting up the big conflict, the big plot of what is happening. It does the job of making us care about the characters and making us want to see more of what will happen with this story. It does have, of course, as I said, a few flaws. One, if you're going to do fairy tale stuff and do it right, you're going to need a little bit bigger of a budget than this. There's some really very, very blatantly obvious CGI that's frankly just not very good. You can tell that they were trying to cut a lot of corners and make do with what they could. And I certainly do give the show credit for trying that, but ultimately it just still ends up looking cheap a lot of the time. As I've said, there are a few plot holes, people just not reacting the way they should to certain events. And there's just, again, it just suffers from the fact that this is a first episode, so the setup is, by the nature of things, going to have to dominate over the characterization. But that said, this is a good show. This is a solid show, and it does genuinely make me want to see more of the show. Sadly, I've got a lot of shows on my plate that I need to watch, so this is probably going to have to get pushed down into the mid tier. But I do think I am going to try and find time to at least give it a few more episodes and see how I feel about things from there. So overall, folks, if you're looking for something a little bit in the fantasy vein, a little bit tired of sci-fi maybe, all right, this is a show to give a try. I think it's got enough going for it that you might find something that you like. So anyway, folks, that's it for this review. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.